Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to Bad Science in Consumer Health Products and Services. Well, my name is Kayla Horan-Dimitrick. This event is hosted by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, your community for science and secularism. I've been a council member for Centre of Inquiry Canada, and I've been involved for about 6 years. CFIC is Canada's only national nonprofit with a mission of promoting and educating the public on critical thinking, science, and secularism. We work to equip people to make decisions based on evidence, rational thinking, and compassion. So to that end, we hold events like this to provide an opportunity for you to engage with subject matter experts on a variety of topics. In these days of physical distancing, all of CFIC's events are provided online, available from coast to coast to coast. So we'll be recording this talk for publication on CFIC's YouTube channel, including the Q&A section. So if you don't want your name or image to appear on the recording, just turn off your camera and change your screen name. To minimize background noise, we have muted everyone's microphone. We invite everyone to ask questions during the interview using the Zoom chat window. After the discussion, there will be an opportunity to ask additional questions, again, using the same chat window. We rely entirely on donations and memberships to allow us to bring you such events as this one. Please visit our website or email info@centerforinquiry.ca for more information or how to become a member or make a donation. So our speaker today, Ryan Armstrong, is a public health and consumer advocate who became interested in science-based activism after encountering unscrupulous claims by regulated health professionals, offering implausible therapies to vulnerable patients. Initially interested in science education and communication, he shifted his focus to science justice after witnessing the harm of pseudoscience as a tool to de-educate the public for profit. As the executive director for Bad Science Watch, which is badsciencewatch.ca, Ryan hopes to mobilize passionate science advocates to work for stronger and smarter science-based regulations that better protect the public from false claims and dangerous therapies. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Ryan. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the great introduction. Please stand by while I share my screen. Make sure, there we go. All right. Everyone on video, just nod if you can see a nice blue screen with the title on there. We good? Success? I'll assume yes. No one has said otherwise. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Ryan Armstrong, and I've been the executive director of Bad Science Watch now for the last couple of years. I'll tell you a little bit more about my backstory in a moment. Of course, as with all presentations of this nature, I feel compelled to open with your standard disclaimer that the presentation kind of includes material and information, opinions that don't necessarily originate exclusively from Bad Science Watch nor represent them. The presentation is built as well from my own experiences, which includes some of my own personal activism and work, as well as the work with Bad Science Watch. So bear that in mind. Not everything is necessarily originating directly from a Bad Science Watch project, nor representing Bad Science Watch. If you want to clarify any distinction, I'd be happy to answer that. So I guess I'll start off a little personal bit, because I always get asked this: how did I get to doing what I'm doing now? So I'll give you just a quick bit of background so you can understand where I come from. Of course, I don't want to give the impression that these are the steps that anyone must take to be involved in science activism. I mean, this is just a single path that got me here. So I started my academic career in general science before, slightly narrowing that into medical biophysics. This was at what was formerly known as the University of Western Ontario, now just Western University. And like many students who have a general interest and aptitude in their field with no obvious career prospects, I went into grad school. I ended up obtaining my PhD in biomedical engineering, which really is kind of a catch-all field for different types of interdisciplinary work. In particular, my focus, as you can see, or should be able to see, was surgical simulation. You can think of kind of like video games for surgeons. And it was through communicating my projects in this space, I developed a real interest for science communication and education. So before Bad Science Watch, I actually initially volunteered with Let's Talk Science. You can also see kind of a group picture there on screen, which focuses, the organization focused on science education, primarily targeting youth. This was a lot of fun, but it was after I encountered really harmful pseudoscience in my community that I thought my time might be better spent going after bad science rather than promoting good science. So I became what I like to refer to as a science justice warrior, which of course does not pay the bills. So professionally, for full disclosure, I work in cybersecurity, which you can also see up on screen. And it's this journey from, I guess, my schooling to where I'm now that I'm going to share with you to kick off the presentation. It must have been about 5 or 6 years now when a colleague of mine handed me a pamphlet advertising a local event put on by a chiropractor on the topic of cancer. Now, at the time, I knew virtually nothing about the chiropractic profession. It was just not something that ever came up in my life, honestly. And well, things have changed quite a bit for me since then. But if you'd asked me what I thought chiropractors did at the time, I would have told you that they're back pain specialists. So, I did know enough to recognize that there was a problem here with a musculoskeletal practitioner putting on an event about cancer. And as it turns out, many chiropractors do restrict themselves to musculoskeletal issues such as back and neck pain, but this is not universally true for the profession. And this is something I came to realize as I started looking into advertising of local chiropractors, something that has become a bit of a notorious habit of mine. So here's just kind of a sample from back in the day when I started doing this, I guess not that long ago. I came across these posts by chiropractors. If you can't read it, if it's a bit small, the post on the left says, "It's Cancer Month. Have you seen your chiropractor?" And the post on the right says, "Vaccines don't work. Here are the facts." So at this point in time, I have an archive of web and social media posts and podcasts and newspaper advertisements so extensive that I guarantee you I can find a post by a chiropractor claiming to treat or prevent nearly any condition or disease you can conjure up. Disclaimer that rare diseases are excluded, which I doubt these types of practitioners are familiar with anyways. So, the astute skeptics will of course recognize that a therapy that claims to treat virtually any condition is exhibiting one of the primary hallmarks of complete pseudoscience. At best, it's wishful thinking to think that anything could do that. And to give you another, just yet another form of advertising I've identified, I have a recording here, which I hope you'll be able to hear. I should have set up my audio sharing correctly. And this was a local practitioner in my hometown on a local radio show.
If you're
oh, sorry, I misclicked there. Well, I'll just play it now. I'll go ahead.
If your child is dealing with any of these issues, but you just do not know what to do, we do have limited times in our week for consultations. We will extend 4 consultations in the next week for anybody who does call today. If you do have a child who is dealing with ADD, obesity, diabetes, cancer, any of these things that we're going to discuss, because I will tell you there are natural options. I can't tell you week in and week out. We have people coming to me saying, you know what? This is what the doctor wants us to do. We just don't want to go down that road. In fact, I just had a 23-year-old girl come in yesterday who actually has been diagnosed with a brain tumor. And the topic was, you know what? We don't want to go the medical route. We know the risks of cancer. We know the risks of chemotherapy.
So at this point, if you're as unfamiliar as I was with the diverse philosophies within the chiropractic profession, you might be wondering why exactly a chiropractor is making these claims, asking for parents to bring their children with cancer in to see them. Well, I'm glad you asked. It all stems from a century-and-a-half-old kind of pseudo-religious belief, the same one, in fact, that inspired the very image we're looking at here. I'll spare you all the details, but chiropractic was actually invented by a Canadian, D.D. Palmer, who actually was from Ontario, Port Perry, I believe. And he believed, or at least later wrote about, that he was able to make a deaf man hear again by simply repositioning a spinal vertebrae, I think, in his neck. And it was this simple miracle that, or reported miracle rather, that evolved into a philosophy positing that a supernatural healing force from God travels through our spine, and that misalignments of the vertebrae, what are referred to in this philosophy as subluxations, impede this healing power, causing all manner of disease. And you can see this belief kind of visualized in the analogy pictured, where the spine is compared to a hose where water flows through. Of course, this is, I'm not sure if a date is on this one, but suffice it to say it's quite old. Of course, as modern biology and medicine developed, our understanding of the spine improved, and our expectations for explanations beyond invoking God became quite a bit greater. And as a result, you're less likely today to hear about the innate energy posited by the old school vitalistic chiropractors, and you're more likely to hear the hypothesis of vertebral subluxations make reference to some type of nerve communication that is being impeded by these misalignments. And although this advertisement here is old, I've heard the hose analogy many times from contemporary practitioners. So why does all of this matter? And for me, it's the harm that results from this type of misinformation. And to illustrate the potential harms, I'm going to use the example of Charles Majors here. Majors was a US-based chiropractor who had a fairly wide influence. In fact, it was the local event I initially referenced promoting his book that kind of set me on my path of activism in this area. His story follows what I like to call the self-healing guru archetype, right? If you've ever paid any attention to pseudoscience and health, you've undoubtedly heard a story of how a health guru fell ill to a devastating disease and was only able to recover through their rejection of modern medicine in favor of their pet therapies that are often branded as natural or alternative, the secret ones that your doctor doesn't tell you about because it would crash the medical industry. These are not very far off the claims that they make. So in this case, Majors claimed that he had cured himself of stage 4 cancer, although one of his pet terms that he used more often was reversed. He reversed the cancer. It's a cancer he claimed caused doctors to tell him he had only weeks to live. Of course, even if we were to take him at his word that this was the medical opinion, outliers are not necessarily uncommon. Now, of course, as you saw in the previous slide, they published a book, The Cancer Killers. And in the book, they did what you might expect. They eschewed conventional, effective cancer treatments in favor of a number of treatments that really do not have any validity in the treatment of cancer. This included recommendations for intravenous vitamin C, ozone treatment, UV blood irradiation, intravenous hydrogen peroxide, coffee enemas, and of course, because he's a chiropractor, chiropractic care, in particular what they refer to as adjustments. Some of you may scoff at the absurdity of some of these, but these people know how to write compelling arguments to lay people, and the arguments become more compelling the more desperate you are. So it's not just gullible people that fall for these things. Of course, that isn't to say that it's okay to take advantage of people who are simply gullible. I would argue that if you convince someone that they will be fine if they jump off a bridge and they end up dying, you should probably at least be charged with manslaughter. Yet in the case of fake cancer treatments like these, we can find many likely victims and really a complete lack of accountability. And some of the evidence that I just went back through social media and gathered these up recently. These are some old posts. So some of the evidence of people who really get into this can be found in the comments surrounding the program and the reviews of the book. And this is one comment I stumbled upon. Again, just preparing for this talk. I'll read it out in case anyone can't see it. I read Charles' story when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm following his healthy living principles and receiving regular chiropractic care, which, along with the grace of God, I believe helped save my life. Doctors were amazed my cancer had not spread. I'm in remission and am forever grateful to you and your team for sharing your knowledge with the world to empower those of us who feel at times that there is no hope. So, I mean, obviously, this is what happens to people. There are, many really unkind diseases that leave people looking for hope anywhere. And there are, of course, practitioners who are willing to fill that void with abject nonsense. And this is a review that I just grabbed from Amazon. Wow, not a page wasted in this book. You should also watch Charles Major's Cancer Killers lecture on YouTube. Powerful and inspiring. My husband has stage 4 esophageal cancer, and the information has been godsend. This has given me direction and hope where conventional medicine has failed. And unfortunately, there are many, many stories like this of people who are so desperate to find effective treatments that they become victimized by this type of health misinformation. And while there might be a little harm in actually trying alternative therapies, spinal manipulation, for example, is a very low risk therapy. But if readers are really trusting the author's recommendations, they would likely also forego conventional treatments because those are recommended against within the book and by the practitioners in their practices. Indeed, Charles Majors himself, according to his own public claims, rejected medical recommendations. He passed away, I think it was 2016 or 2017. It's impossible to know whether Majors was truly a victim of his own beliefs or whether he had intentionally kept his illness private while promoting his so-called miraculous recovery. But what I did find quite remarkable was that the response of what you might call his co-conspirators, almost immediately following the death of Majors, comments on various social platforms started absolutely flooding in of people, followers of this program, asking how Majors died. And I don't think it's at all an unreasonable request, considering that the premise of the cures that these people were being sold was based upon Majors' own survival. But there was no acknowledgement, there was no public statement, no admission of wrongdoing. Almost immediately, the many practitioners involved with this scrubbed their record of involvement to what appears to be the best of their abilities. And I say almost immediately because I actually picked up this book at an event just a few weeks after Charles Majors had even passed. So this event was effectively what radicalized my activism. I realized that whether these people believe this nonsense or not, they were looking out for themselves, and they were taking advantage of people in precarious and desperate situations. So it shouldn't be at this point a surprise that these practitioners can pose quite a risk to public health. Unfortunately, the overall harm is a very difficult thing to quantify. There is some recent research that has started to examine the impact of alternative medicine broadly and its use compared to that of conventional medicine. This study, for example, from 2017, so not too long ago, looked at cancer survival, comparing alternative medicine versus conventional therapy use. And unfortunately, the results are what you might expect. Following 2-to-1 matching on Cox proportional hazards regression, alternative medicine use was independently associated with greater risk of death compared with conventional cancer treatment overall. And it's a sad outcome, of course, but it's valuable information because beyond just anecdotal evidence of these stories of people who fall for these grifts, we're starting to build some more data of the wide range of serious conditions for which people seek alternative medicine for, and the outcomes that they're experiencing. It of course should be noted that these types of studies also don't take into account some of the other costs, such as the time and the actual just the straight up cost of the therapies that people are pursuing. And they also don't really address what I might refer to as secondary risks, secondary pseudoscience risks from pursuing therapies and treatments from these types of practitioners. Just for one example, many of these types of practitioners hold views against vaccination, and they caution their patients not to get them, as you have seen in a previous advert that I posted. So, how many patients go to their chiropractor for one thing and actually leave with a stronger anti-vax position than they held before? What is the risk to them? What is the risk to the community? And it's many of these items that are really big unknowns. Another unknown is the exposure of the public to blatantly pseudoscientific beliefs. in particular from health professionals, from regulated health professionals who we should expect better of. And unfortunately, there really isn't great data for understanding what proportions of patients seek what treatments for what conditions from what practitioners. But one item that we can examine is the prevalence of practitioners who hold certain beliefs or advertise in certain ways. And so drawing on a recent web survey, Tim Caulfield's research group looked at chiropractors' clinical websites in Alberta to identify claims relating to the vertebral subluxation hypothesis, which is a very strong indicator of a practice preference for what we would rightly identify as pseudoscience. And the survey identified that 33% of practitioners presented a theory of vertebral subluxation on their public websites, which of course is absolutely alarming. Now, the survey was limited to just Alberta, and it uses website content as a proxy for inferring practice philosophy, but nonetheless, there is an apparent problem with endemic pseudoscience within the chiropractic profession. And I focus thus far on the chiropractic profession, but it's not only this profession that poses a pseudoscience-based risk to Canadians. Naturopathy is another profession with a little bit more limited regulatory recognition across Canada that has severe issues with the promotion and practice of unsubstantiated diagnostics and therapies. And in addition, it's not uncommon, as seen in the article that I posted here, to find naturopaths or even chiropractors or other practitioners who represent themselves as physicians to kind of build on the public brand of other health professionals. Of course, that's not to say that even the medical profession is perfect. As highlighted by a recent case thanks to Activism of Anne Borden, who works with an Ontario-based autism advocacy organization, there is a real lack of regulatory oversight even into unsubstantiated and harmful practices sold by Ontario physicians. And presumably it's pervasive across Canada as well. But in this case, a physician was performing chelation therapy on autistic children. If you're unfamiliar, chelating agents are used medically in cases of heavy metal toxicity, to remove the heavy metals. But in the case of autistic children, purveyors of this practice identify heavy metals as a causative factor in their autism, which they often link to vaccination. Oftentimes it gets tied to Wakefield's discredited vaccination research. So it's complete nonsense, actually, and it really can be quite dangerous. But Ontario's medical regulator, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, has thus far permitted the practice, which I think is absolutely remarkable and unfortunate. So the more I looked into these types of practices and the more absolutely outraged I became, there seemed to be nothing protecting Canadians from being just utterly conned by malicious or ignorant health professionals. So I did what anyone would do, and I started blogging and tweeting about it, which I think was helpful in putting my thoughts together, but it largely just felt like, yelling into the void. I did, however, find a way to make the void yell back, and that was through regulatory complaints. So in Canada, being a regulated health professional affords you certain privileges, but it also comes with responsibility to your patients and the public. And regulatory complaints are one of the mechanisms by which we can try to enforce this responsibility. This picture here is a little bit dated. The pile, I assure you, is much bigger now. So not only that, but I found that the media was generally much more receptive with activism efforts when they went through what you might call the proper channels. I think there are valid criticisms of that finding, but nonetheless, I slowly developed ways to become a more effective activist. And at one point, I thought, I can't be the only one who is doing this type of thing. There must be some, organized effort to go after bad science as it relates to, health professionals and products. And sure enough, that's when I stumbled upon Bad Science Watch in 2016. I think just randomly searching as one does, which I joined at the time to assist with their project investigating false cancer claims in support of natural health products, which I'll touch on a little bit later in this talk. But first, I want to share a little bit about my approach to science activism. This activism broadly occurs at the intersection of science and consumer protection. Now, philosophically, I personally think the notion of consumer health is a little bit perverse as a concept, but nonetheless, we must operate within the systems that we exist in. So that said, I am primarily concerned in really quite simple questions when it comes to consumer health. Primarily, what is real, what is true? Answering these questions within a healthcare context is really crucial to healthcare itself. If you don't know what works and what doesn't, what are you offering a patient? How are you providing informed consent? What knowledge of yours as a healthcare professional would be valuable without understanding the validity of diagnostic and therapeutic options? Obviously, there are not simple questions. These are not simple questions, and they do invoke, entire traditions of philosophy. But even restricting ourselves to contemporary science, they're non-trivial questions to answer in a clinical setting. I'm sure almost everyone with some familiarity with science who's watching has seen some form of this diagram over their lifetime. The diagram is often referred to as the hierarchy of evidence, and it's effectively an idealized representation of the strength of scientific evidence according to methodological categorization. So at the top, we have meta-analyses and systematic reviews, and at the bottom, we have case reports. Unfortunately, it's not perfect. As just one example, a well-designed randomized controlled trial, which sits below meta-analyses and systematic reviews, could very well overturn the conclusions of a previous systematic review, assuming that the RCT was well designed, well conducted, and in the systematic review that came beforehand relied on a weaker level of evidence to inform the conclusion. So the hierarchy isn't really a good tool to always blindly apply to health science, and that's especially true within a regulatory context. How do we even decide what type of bad science, what is bad science, and how do we go after it? So this is just kind of an informal representation of how I approach it. When I approach issues of bad science that are used to support consumer health products and services, I typically apply a form of what I call a taxonomy of hypotheses. Science and health are absurdly complicated, and there is an enormous number of unanswered scientific questions. It would be impossible to try and address the veracity of every claim made in a health context. So my approach is to simply focus on claims that affirm the implausible, such as claims by chiropractors that spinal manipulation therapy can cure cancer, and to also reject or focus on the claims that reject the essentially irrefutable, such as the claim that vaccination, immunization can prevent disease, which is very well scientifically established. So I would consider this type of statement to be irrefutable, and claims against it I would consider very worthy of going after as it's bad science. But who determines what is implausible or irrefutable? To the extent that I can, I do defer to the broad scientific consensus, again, as far as one can be identified. Sometimes it gets a tad more complicated, but I'll leave it here for now. This is kind of the general framework with which I approach claims in health. And as I mentioned, health services in Canada exist within a regulatory regime. Or to be more precise, actually, they exist within a set of regulatory regimes. Because unfortunately in Canada, it's rather complicated. Rather than having a single nationwide science-based regulator where we could maybe agree on what is good science and what is not as a country, instead the provinces are all left to fend for themselves in oversight of all of the various professions. But not only does every province have unique legislation governing the regulation of health professions, every profession itself regulates itself independently. And I'll show you just how complex that gets with looking at Ontario here. So in Ontario, these are all of the various self-regulating health professions that exist. It's quite a number. And they all have different processes and standards and guidelines and scopes of practice. And did I mention that they were self-regulating with virtually no oversight? Because they are. And this is the structure that is laid out by legislation. Again, looking at Ontario, we have the Regulated Health Professions Act, or the RHPA, which lays out what professions are permitted to self-regulate and how they must regulate themselves in the interest of the public. And at no point in the legislation, and I think this holds true for every province and every territory, does science appear in any context. So when trying to identify where science fits into regulators' responsibilities in protecting the public, we need to kind of infer this from the legislation as it exists. As I noted, the self-regulating colleges have a single primary mandate, and that is they are there to serve and protect the public interest. In part, they are legislated to do this with quality assurance programs, which has potential to overlap with quite a number of concerns as it relates to science-based regulation. You know, the quality assurance program of colleges is to ensure that practitioners are competent. And I would say, you know, how can you be a competent practitioner if you're scientifically illiterate? Practitioners must also receive continuing education. And of course, I would say, what is the value of continuing education if it's not based in science? Professions must also have their standards of practice, which I would say, what is the value of standards of practice with relation to different therapeutics and diagnostics if they're not grounded in the reality of the science? You know, professionals must have practice assessments. There must be a mechanism to monitor member participation and compliance. And you can kind of think of ways in which an idealized system would take into consideration science-based concerns and all of those components of ensuring that their members are capable professionals and act on their mandate to protect the public. Of course, it is also mandated that colleges must receive and investigate complaints, which unfortunately seems to be actually, in reality, the primary point at which science-based considerations come into play when dealing with colleges, especially those that ignore science as part of their quality assurance considerations. I'm going to talk a little bit about the complaint process. When dealing with science-based complaints, colleges typically determine their merit with respect to their own internal codified standards and guidelines, which I have found to commonly result in decisions indicating that practitioners may be treating or advising outside of their scope, that they're advertising with false or misleading claims, that they're providing unnecessary health services, or maybe that they're misrepresenting their expertise. I'm sure you can think up examples where science intersects and really should be considered in all of these cases. Of course, this doesn't cover the broad array of all the things practitioners can be disciplined for. Of course, there's also outright fraud, sexual assault. There are other ways in which professionals can impede on their patients and the public's right to safe and effective care. But again, in this case, we're just focusing on the areas where we might be concerned about issues of science. There are a number of real challenges with the regulatory structure as it exists, especially when it relates to complaints that are coming to the college that are concerning matters of science. The first one is that there really is no scientific authority. Again, it doesn't appear in legislation. No one says the word science. Colleges are not expected to have scientific experts on call. They're not expected to defer to any scientific body. As far as I can tell, every college can really at will pick members out of their profession to act as expert witnesses, particularly in regards to issues of science. So when you have a profession that has, maybe endemic issues with pseudoscience, they don't really do a great job of regulating themselves and holding themselves to good science-based standards. One of the other big issues is that when the colleges really only consider the issues of science in the complaint process and aren't as diligent in the quality assurance aspect, public participation is really necessary, and that's the nature of complaints, right? That's essentially baked into legislation. The necessity for the public to participate in the regulatory structure by submitting complaints where complaints should be committed. But it's not really the public's job to do it. No one's being paid to do it. There are not mandated task force that do this. So outside of concerted efforts by activists, this really doesn't get extensively utilized, especially when it concerns false advertising in relation to scientific issues. There are some jurisdictions and colleges that have begun to crack down on bad science. In my opinion, it's largely a response to a lot of negative media coverage. Of course, one example is in British Columbia, where chiropractors can no longer offer treatment for a number of conditions ranging from autism to Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, many provinces are really not there. In Ontario, for example, chiropractors, this is a case from a few years ago, but it still stands. Chiropractors are permitted to treat autistic children with skull suture manipulation, which is effectively a head massage. And this particular case even advanced to our province's appeal board, which offers a path to appeal complaints to an independent body. But even then, the appeal board is not a scientific authority, and they must recognize the so-called expertise within the profession that the complaint originates from. And so in this case, they effectively did not find any issues with this absolutely absurd pseudoscience being offered to autistic children who really seem to be sold a lot of nonsense from these types of practitioners. And so when you have professions that harbor pseudoscientific beliefs, really what they end up doing more than protecting the public when it comes to those issues is they end up protecting those beliefs instead of acting on their mandate. And as you can see in this article concerning actual leadership of the Ontario Chiropractic Regulator. I have heard some absolutely absurd defenses of this practice from a public practice point of view that I thought I would share for interest. One thing that often comes up that is contentious is defining what does it mean to protect the public. Of course, I would say that protecting the public is ensuring that the public has access to safe and effective healthcare. Again, keywords both safe and effective. But I have seen these types of arguments made throughout the course of complaints that kind of deviate for what I would consider to be the ideal model in the mandate. Some consider public protection to be just complete freedom of choice of health professionals within a range of safe options, completely ignoring the plausibility of treatments or the efficacy. Some consider protecting the public to include the rights of the practitioner to practice within the full scope of their profession, whatever that might be. Some believe that public protection requires making sure that practitioners have a right to earn a living however they so choose. And some believe that the best way to serve the public is to extend the scope of practice of practitioners so the public has the most range of options available to them, which I would, of course, disagree with that to a great extent. So I would prefer that professionals offering services are adequately trained to provide those services, whether they're diagnostic or therapeutic. To give you an example of how some regulators respond to very legitimate science-based complaints, we actually do have some fresh results from a pilot study that we conducted in conjunction with a student group working for us. So this is we took a convenient sample of Ontario-based chiropractic advertisements making immune or COVID-19 claims, and these were all obtained in the month of March of this year, and they were submitted to the College of Chiropractors of Ontario, which is the regulator of chiropractic in Ontario. Just to give you an example of some of the items that we flagged, these are a couple of posts that were submitted with complaints. If you can't read them, the item on the left says, adjustments improve immunity. And the one on the right says, how can chiropractic save you from the latest pandemic like the coronavirus? Many will wonder where the connection lies. It is important to know that scientific studies done both inside and outside of chiropractic have determined a direct correlation between spinal alignment, the function of the immune system, and fighting off illness and infection. Of course, I can tell you that I've read personally all of those studies, and they don't say that to any degree. It's among the worst of junk science that I have ever seen. And so these are obviously advertising appeals for patients to come in and get adjustments during a pandemic, which is really a bad idea. And we were fortunate to get some media coverage when we initially submitted these complaints, but I have to admit, when colleges tell their practitioners to simply hide the false information they have published, I worry that the only real impact is that predatory practitioners go unnoticed and are simply alerted as to what is being picked up on by activists in the media. We did get the decisions back from these complaints, and the student group, thanks to them, they're noted at the bottom, went through and extracted the data and analyzed it. And these are the results of a large number of complaints. So there were 35 complaints submitted to the college. 60% of them were advertising claims that made direct reference to COVID-19. The vast majority of the remaining typically just mentioned immunity or immune boosting. All of the complaint material was found to violate CCO standards or guidelines, and that was not just in our complaints, but the college confirmed that that was the case. And yet none of the complaints resulted in any discipline, and none of the complaints resulted in a clinic investigation, a review of patient records, a thorough review of advertising material. No practitioners were asked to attend continuing education, and no practitioners were asked to affirm what their beliefs were in response to these specific items that were flagged. So unfortunately, even our best course for action for holding regulated health professionals accountable to reality tends to have a minimal impact. Of course, one thing that the college did do was they issued reminders to practitioners to adhere to their standards of practice. But of course, personally, I don't consider this to be sufficient, because a problem with a practitioner saying that they can prevent coronavirus, the problem is not that they slipped up making an advertising post. It wasn't a typo on their computer when they were posting something to Facebook or their website. The problem is that they hold these beliefs in the first place, and this is entirely unaddressed. And I've never seen this addressed by a regulatory college in Canada. At very least, however, I thought it would be fun if we could have a collective laugh at some of the responses from practitioners that I've received across my activism, while perhaps gaining some insight into how they respond. What I haven't mentioned yet about the complaint process is that the member of the profession who the complaint addressed has the opportunity to respond, as you can see in my handy little diagram here. And let me tell you, some of these responses can be absolutely absurd, though some also highlight major issues within our complaint system. Probably the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I have seen is when practitioners admit that the information they posted is problematic, but claims that they weren't responsible for it. Typically they'll blame some practice manager or their website manager. You'll pretty much never see, at least I don't think I've ever seen, a practitioner who actually appears to reflect on what they've said and rejects the content of the claim and says, I don't actually believe this and this is false. It's very rare to see that. Perhaps my favorite type of response would be those that actually make scientific arguments, because as I mentioned, I really only pick fights in this space for what I consider to be slam dunk scientific issues, really strong consensus, and in these cases, practitioners typically reject the complaint and try to justify their claims. So in this case, they're defending. Well, I'll just read the whole thing just in case you can't see it. As a general response to the complaint, I would state that in respect to conditions such as ADHD, ear infections, asthma, etc., that it is my understanding that it is fully within the scope of practice for a chiropractor to improve the function of a patient's nervous system thereby addressing the symptoms of these disorders / conditions, while diagnosing or purporting to cure such conditions themselves fall outside of the permitted scope of practice. Of course, the distinction being made between the symptoms and the actual treatment of the condition is a very big gray area. And even then, the argument made in support of this is really pseudoscientific. It's the notion that chiropractic manipulations can have an impact on a patient's nervous system so as to reduce certain symptoms is just entirely unfounded. And I believe this one was from the same complaint. So it always gets funny when practitioners cite science. So in this case, they cited a 2010 literature review that looked at numerous studies concerning chiropractic treatment of asthma patients. And I quote from the response: found indications that some asthma patients experience positive subjective and objective results while under chiropractic care. So based on this wording, I think you can probably posit, if you're familiar with clinical research, what the actual conclusion was. Well, the actual conclusion was there was no statistically significant finding, which, means that despite, and this was a study run by chiropractors who, you can read the way that they've framed the conclusion here. They're reporting that results of the 8 retrieved studies indicated that chiropractic care showed improvements in subjective measures and, to a lesser degree, objective measures, none of which were statistically significant. So when you don't have statistically significant findings and you're contextualizing your conclusion that way, you're trying to spin a negative finding in a positive light. So even taking a study that was conducted by biased practitioners who were certainly likely to make a number of errors in an attempt to confirm their bias by proving that chiropractic has an impact in this case, even then, there was no statistically significant finding. And I just think it's hilarious that I constantly see cases like this where practitioners reference these types of studies thinking that they are defending themselves in any way. What is also not uncommon is seeing practitioners attack the character or intentions of the complainants. And this doesn't just occur to people like me, who I'm an activist. I'm very public about it. I expect it. I expect that there's a large group of some practitioners who, don't think very highly of me. But I have seen responses like this where practitioners have tried to tear into the credibility of complainants other than myself, which, to be totally honest, it's completely inappropriate in the context of regulatory complaints. The complainant in a regulatory system is not akin to a plaintiff in a legal case. Within the regulatory structure, it is the responsibility of the college to investigate the material and come to a reasonable decision on their own. What is also surprisingly not uncommon with regulatory responses from regulatory complaints is when the complaints are submitted by health professionals, and to have the original member who is complained against initiate a retaliatory complaint against the original complainant. And this is a huge barrier for responsible health professionals to participate in the complaint process, because it's not anonymous. Their name goes to the practitioner, their name goes through the college, and so they risk retribution to themselves, especially when even if they're speaking the truth, right? They're defending science. If they're speaking against the weight of the opinion in their profession, they take serious professional risk to do this. And as you might expect, it's also not uncommon to see practitioners just simply lie. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to detect when practitioners are lying in responses. But in this particular case, the practitioner claimed that he removed material that I referenced in a complaint I submitted this year. So he claimed that he removed this material back in 2017. He says, if Mr. Armstrong captured this information prior to the latest mentioned procedure, such as when I was previously running for council, some of the information was from 2012 and 2017, it would not be visible to the public. And at the time of this complaint, and likely only saved for himself to launch this complaint. Upon receiving this complaint, I attempted to view some of the repulsive posts by cutting and pasting the URL he provided. However, they revealed no results as they had previously been previously removed. Well, let me tell you, folks, this isn't my first complaint. And now when I submit complaints that, especially those that address web material, I try to be as diligent as I can about using web archives to take a snapshot of obtained material. So in this case, I thought, well, let me just grab that URL and put her into the old Wayback Machine. So I looked it up. Sure enough, the site is there as I archived it, and I checked the date, October 16th, 2020. So not exactly sure what this practitioner did, but at some point along the way, there is a lie and not much truth. And a final type of response that is sometimes seen is when practitioners seek out legal assistance, at which point typically the lawyers will naturally do their best to steer the argument away from the actual science. I find that they rarely like to get into battles in the science, and you can see that clearly in the snippet that I've included here. So remember when I noted that public participation is a critical component of our regulatory system? Well, by now you should probably have an idea of some of the impediments that make it hard for the public to actually participate and help ensure that proper regulation occurs. And one of those, as you've just seen, can be the power and knowledge imbalance, right? How are lay people supposed to participate in regulation when practitioners can hire well-funded legal teams and when their own regulators practice the same nonsense that they do? A further issue, and it's not just an issue for other regulated health professionals, but the issue is a lack of anonymity, which can be quite intimidating to people. I do get private messages from anonymous social media accounts that are obviously in many cases related to complaints I have submitted or related to my activism. As I mentioned, this can be an even bigger barrier for someone who is a regulated health professional and risks retribution. You know, there's no shortage of professionals who have sent me material hoping that I could submit a complaint on their behalf. And I mean, as an aside, there is a group of rather brave chiropractors who are doing this currently in Canada. They're going after their more disreputable colleagues, and that's great. So shout out to them. And of course, the final barrier is that you know, complaints are unpaid work. They take a substantial amount of time, and practitioners, you know, I think they know how to abuse this. I've received responses from practitioners that are the size of large books, including a vast assortment of irrelevant articles and studies and diagrams. You know, it's the Gish Gallop of complaint responses. And these professionals have resources, and so they have every advantage in maintaining their position and in defending their predatory practices. So I hope this gives you a good idea of the regulation of health professionals, you know, where the science fits in, and what some of the issues are. Because now we're going to shift gears a little bit and move into health products, which are conveniently more standardized across Canada, and there actually is what you might call legitimate scientific oversight. So we're doing a little bit better, at least on paper. It isn't perfect, of course. You know, there's hardly a pharmacy that exists without products making unsubstantiated claims. Even pet stores aren't free of nonsense, as you know, you might be able to see in this picture I took just a couple weeks ago. So if you can't see it, this is a homeopathic product claiming to relax pets during fireworks and loud noises. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if you aren't familiar with homeopathy, don't worry, because we'll get into it. The product retails for $16.99, which is $16.99 too much, in my opinion. So in Canada, health products are regulated by Health Canada, which is actually a science-based regulator. And they regulate products such as drugs / pharmaceuticals, medical devices, food, cosmetics, natural health products. Now, natural health products are what we'll focus on for this segment of the talk, because they have a very large consumer footprint, right? They're very consumer focused. They're very big on advertising to people and really pushing people to buy based on false premises. And they also have very lax regulatory standards when compared to, you know, pharmaceuticals, for example. particularly with respect to claims of effectiveness. Natural health products, which I've abbreviated NHPs, include products that you're probably familiar with, such as probiotics, herbal remedies, vitamins and minerals, homeopathic remedies, and traditional remedies, which I think typically refers to traditional Chinese remedies. And according to Health Canada, this is from their website, all these products registered through them are to be both safe and effective. To be licensed in Canada, natural health products must be safe, effective, of high quality, and carry detailed label information to let people make safe and informed choices. You can tell if a natural health product is registered through Health Canada if it includes an NPN number or a DIN-HM number if it's a homeopathic product. Now, if you're familiar with homeopathy, you should see a problem here. How do homeopathics become authorized through Health Canada, especially considering their claim that all regulated products are both safe and effective? Before we dive into that, for those unfamiliar, homeopathy stems from two basic principles. The first is like cures like. So a compound that causes a certain symptom in people is believed to also be able to cure that symptom under the right conditions. And the second primary principle, of course, very much simplifying it, is that extreme dilution is the way that these remedies are made potent and made curative. And of course, in reality, again, anyone familiar with homeopathy, I'm sure is familiar just how absurd this is. In many of these remedies, they're so diluted that the actual compounds that you buy have no active ingredients in them. And it should be obvious as a result that there's no robust clinical science that supports the use of homeopathy. It's both implausible and it's unsubstantiated. It's in the way of health remedies, it's as much of a failure as it could be, with the exception that it is relatively safe since most of the time it's in the form of water or a sugar pill. If you went to Health Canada's database, you'd see that there are thousands and thousands of authorized products. And these are all the products just from one manufacturer, one of the more major manufacturers of homeopathic products. The reason that this is permitted through Health Canada is that for some natural health products, they don't have to actually rely on scientific evidence. Instead, they can appeal to traditional use, which allows them to be authorized for sale while making what you might call very soft claims. So these products will never be authorized to say that they can cure cancer, but they let them make very mild claims nonetheless. And these claims stem from what are essentially textbooks documenting traditional use rather than scientific evidence. But in my experience, however, retailers and manufacturers don't even respect the minimal regulations that exist. And one example is this homeopathic product that makes a very strong claim, you can see here, for the treatment of a number of what can be serious conditions. It's important to note that I didn't even look hard for this example. I found a large homeopathic retailer in Canada, and I clicked the first product I saw. You can even see the product here begins with the letter A. This was just near the top. I clicked it. We found what I would call, at best, very misleading claims. So in addition to the issue of permissive regulation for so-called natural health products, there also is a serious issue with enforcement from Health Canada. And to investigate this, Bad Science Watch conducted a study where we sampled a number of websites of Canadian online retailers of natural health products, and we skimmed all of the product pages for different variations of the term cancer to look for products that were advertising, cancer cures or treatments or preventatives. And we found, 558 unique product pages referencing cancer. 20% of these pages contained direct treatment or cure claims, something like this product cures cancer. 30% of these pages contained indirect claims, such as studies uncovered potent anti-cancer benefits linked to this plant. And out of all of these claims, only 2.3% of the claims were found to actually even be authorized by Health Canada. So the vast majority of supportive claims that were made for these products were completely illegal. And so obviously, besides the issues with permissive regulation for efficacy claims, there also is a lack of actual enforcement. Now, this is a problem, right? Because advertising, when consumers are going and looking for health products to take, one of the first things that you would see is the advertising material, which can be, as I mentioned, even problematic in pharmacies where you might expect they would just sell reputable products, but that's not always the case. Now, to some extent, Health Canada is aware of these issues and it is advancing reforms. So the self-care framework is something that is in development, and there have also been some proposed further restrictions on homeopathy, which I think those of us who are real, solid science advocates aren't perfectly happy with, but they're at least a positive change from how permissive it is now. Unfortunately, the speed at which these changes occur makes me think that we're probably going to be fighting for sensible regulations for a long time, sadly. Of course, as with health professionals, you can submit complaints to Health Canada, calling out products with false claims. And actually, in my experience, they're a little bit slow, but I found that they're very thorough in their investigation, and I think they do come to reasonable decisions, and they do uphold their own regulations. So they are, I would say, to an extent, a more effective science-based regulator than really anything else we have in Canada. Unfortunately, from my experience, there are many, many false claims in product advertising, and oftentimes it can feel just completely overwhelming. And I've tried to do it before. I've tried to look at sites or look at certain products and try to systematically target false claims, and it can feel so unimpactful because there's just so much of it. So now you should have kind of an idea of some of the work that I've been doing, some of the work that Bad Science Watch has been doing in the context of the regulation of health products and services. And I thought I'd let you know that for Bad Science Watch, our next project is very exciting. We are currently planning a complaint-driven methodology to systematically target harmful pseudoscience being pushed out on Canadians. And we will have more details on that in the near future. But hopefully, in addition to actually engaging in our existing regulatory structures, we should also be able to gather data and identify where the gaps are in regulation, and hopefully inform policymakers to make sound science-based decisions to better protect Canadians. And that concludes my talk, and I'm now happy to take any and all questions.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for an informative presentation. So now we'll have an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll be using the chat window. So we'll ask you to type your question in the chat window, and then I'll present it to Ryan. This session's being recorded, so if you want your name to be included with your question, please indicate so in your question. Okay, so our first question, it's from Nova Scotia. Here in Nova Scotia, the College of Physiotherapists of Nova Scotia states that they are evidence-based, but yet they promote acupuncture and chiropractic. What can be done to effectively expose and report and have them held accountable?
So the first thing I would do is identify some of the more problematic claims. Acupuncture is a very, very slippery one. It's very difficult, right? I think, I personally am of the opinion that it likely does not offer a benefit for pain management beyond what we might colloquially refer to as the placebo effect. But it's really difficult to battle within the science regulation space, because there are meta-analyses. Granted, the meta-analyses are are drawing upon a literature base of very weak RCTs, but nonetheless, these meta-analyses conclude that there are, in some cases, positive effects. So the science is very murky, and I would say it's less of a slam dunk scenario than other types of bad science. Although it depends on the claims being made, right? If someone is claiming that acupuncture is going to fix your broken knee, then I would say that's a very obvious candidate. But I don't think you need to necessarily even go down the acupuncture route with physical therapists. I've encountered quite a bit of really problematic claims made by physical therapists. What I would do is try to find the most absurd of those. A place that you can typically start is, if you're really looking at doing this systematically, you can go to the regulator's website and go to the member directory and just start going through the members of the profession. Usually there would be a page like find a physical therapist type thing, and you could just go through it systematically and look at internet at each member's website and try to find their social media. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long before you find maybe a more absurd claim, and let that be the basis for a complaint, and submit a complaint to the college and see how they handle it, right? No college is going to be perfect in observing what their members are doing and what they're advertising, but one of the ways that you can gauge how effective they're going to be as a regulator when it comes to science-based issues is to see how they handle a complaint that does address a very serious scientific issue. And again, I would make it very clear to follow my taxonomy. Make sure you find something that is completely implausible that you can use as the basis for a complaint. When it comes to chiropractic itself isn't a treatment. It's a profession, or sometimes in some cases it's a philosophy. So the term itself, or to say that someone is promoting a chiropractic, can actually mean a number of different things. So I would say if they're promoting a specific therapy, if they're promoting spinal manipulation for infants or something, that's an issue. That's a practice that some chiropractors do that is an issue. But you'd have to be more specific than just going after advertising for chiropractic, because it is a profession that has quite a diverse set of beliefs and practice philosophies, and many chiropractors, I would say, are even more progressive than many of their physical therapist counterparts.
Thanks, Ryan. We have a question from John Manuel, and it's about how should we avoid the term alternative medicine? Instead, can we use the term alternative preparations and procedures and practices?
We absolutely could use that term. I actually avoid the use of alternative altogether generally, at least when I'm dealing with complaints, or when I'm trying to write about these issues formally. I think I rarely invoke the term alternative medicine. It's hard not to, and obviously I think I did do that a couple times in this talk, because it's I think it has a well understood meaning and domain, especially among probably the audience here. If someone says alternative medicine within the context of a CFIC talk, I think everyone is on board with what is being referred to. So it's valuable in that case. But otherwise, if I'm submitting complaints, I don't say something like, well, this practitioner is offering an alternative medicine. I just say, this is bad science. This is unsubstantiated, and it's effectively health fraud. Health fraud can also be a very slippery term that I would say take caution in invoking. But yeah, I mean, most of the time I actually avoid alternative medicine as a term altogether.
Thanks. We have a question from Brent. In terms of changing public opinion on these practices or products, how effective do you feel regulation and complaints are compared to getting more information out to the public through non-regulatory channels?
It's a good question, and it's such a good question that I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what is most effective. I find it's very hard to do outreach to the public. Public education and science communication is very hard. At the same time, it's very hard to also educate health professionals and have them regulated and not practicing pseudoscience. My personal focus has been on going after false claims in advertising of products and services, obviously, as you know, for the talk, because I think there's at least, or there should at least be a will there, and not just a will, but professions and products are mandated, like they're it's simply not permitted, at least should not be permitted, to make false claims in advertising. And when we're talking about the regulatory colleges, they have a mandate to act on that. It's their job to ensure that the services that are being advertised and promoted to patients are safe and effective. And so I see a potential path there in really just forcing these colleges to do their job. Whereas when it comes to the public and communicating science, I think it's very important, and again, very hard. But it's not the public's responsibility to know what is a valid treatment and what is not. And my personal belief is I think we can avoid a lot of harm if at least we target it at a regulatory level, so that people aren't being sold all kinds of pseudoscience, right? If there weren't chiropractors who were advertising that they could treat infants and telling parents that they should be bringing their infants in, how many people in the public would have that idea just pop into their head that, oh, I should take my baby to a chiropractor. That seems like a good idea. And I see it as, these ideas come from somewhere. And I think for a lot of Canadians, and maybe things are changing in the internet age, but I think so for a lot of Canadians, they get that information from their friends and their colleagues, who get that information from other health professionals. And these types of health professionals who do promote pseudoscience, I find they are also the most aggressive in advertising and in really pushing the narrative and in putting events on. They're just really great grifters.
Well, that nicely segues into a next question about electromagnetic field, electrohypersensitivity. So the question is, this person has a relative who's a member of Canadians for a Safe Technology, and wants to know if you have resources for information regarding the claim about electrosensitivity and how to debunk it.
I don't have any immediate resources. I know there are some out there. I could certainly, if anyone wants to reach out to me, and of course this goes not just for this question, but anything else, feel free to reach out with any questions. This is something that we did look at as an organization a number of years ago, but we didn't go too deep into it. I think, when it comes to addressing someone who is really into a certain therapy, they're really into a certain notion or philosophy around sickness, and especially if it's a pseudoscience, there's no, I think, easy answer for reaching that person. I don't think that simply providing them resources is enough, right? I think the best thing you can do is, if there's someone that trusts you, or even if another person that they trust or very comfortable with, I would say that's probably the best way to reach them, is through that type of friendship or relationship, and address the issue compassionately. And when it comes to electromagnetic sensitivity, of course, there's and really any type of pseudoscience, particularly if it's a syndrome or a condition that might not necessarily be based in sound science. It's very important not to dismiss their experience in entirety, because people do experience real effects, right? I think in many cases, or probably in all cases, I don't think anyone's just making it up that they're experiencing electromagnetic hypersensitivity. They're experiencing a real thing, and they're misattributing it to electromagnetic hypersensitivity. But And in many cases, I think it's unfortunate because maybe they are suffering from something that they have not been offered a robust explanation for, or maybe that they just haven't even addressed with a medical professional. So I guess the further we get into this, the more I think about it, that it's really highly situational. I think the best way to approach someone who I would say is kind of suffering from, in addition to the regular suffering, the affliction of the pseudoscientific belief, which potentially is causing them more harm. But going back to the kind of initial framing of the question, if you reach out to me, I think I know of some resources that might be helpful for that. If reading is, if you think it's a good idea.
Thanks. Another question, have you heard about needling? Is it like acupuncture?
I'm not sure if there is a distinction. My understanding of dry needling is that it's kind of the same sort of practice, but trying to exclude a lot of what you might refer to as the woo of acupuncture. So, traditional acupuncture isn't just about, sticking needles in where the pain is. It's about sticking needles into specific acupuncture points, which are based on a profound pseudoscientific philosophy about human anatomy and a specific type of kind of vitalistic forces. So traditional acupuncture kind of carries that baggage. And I think that, again, this is my understanding, I could be mistaken, but I think that needling or dry needling is kind of an attempt to preserve what people think might have an effect on pain, while discarding the baggage of acupuncture's pseudoscientific tradition.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions that are all along the same line, and it's about the fact that in many provinces, naturopathy, osteopathy, chiropractic, all sorts of things are approved both by governments and by insurance companies. And how would you suggest we go about addressing this from a regulatory government point of view?
So I would say this very much depends on the state of the profession. But first, I'll give a little background on why that is the case, right? Why do there exist professions that we'll say at the time of their conception did not have any real scientific basis? And a really great example of that is the homeopathic profession. So those of you outside of Ontario, or maybe even some of you in Ontario, might not be aware, but homeopathy is actually a regulated health profession in Ontario. And this is because when looking at regulation, provinces aren't typically concerned with, are the practices effective? They're concerned about risk and how popular that practice is. So they look at something like homeopathy and they say, well, there are lots of people doing homeopathy, and there's a clear risk because we have all of these practitioners who are unregulated. There's no recourse for patients if something goes wrong. There is absolutely no oversight in ensuring that they have standardized education, that they even know the basics of biology. And so the idea is that by regulating these types of professions, it's kind of like harm reduction. You're reducing the risk to patients by providing a regulatory framework that, in theory, should provide additional oversight. I think in practice, that initial philosophy has kind of been a bit of a failure because what we have now with some colleges is the state where the colleges, because they're self-regulated, have been just completely captured by certain types of pseudoscientific philosophies. And so as a result, rather than being diligent about protecting the public, some have been very good about protecting the ability of their practitioners to practice in the way that they choose. And so going back to the question is, what are the next steps? As I mentioned, I think it depends on the profession. So the chiropractic profession is one that I'm intimately familiar with. So I'll use it as an example. It's in a bit of a different state in each province, but really only when it comes to regulation. I think probably broadly the chiropractic population of practitioners is about similar. And there's, in my opinion, there's no great data on the proportion of practitioners who hold different different beliefs, but there does exist a population of reformers within chiropractic in Canada who are trying to be science-based musculoskeletal care professionals, and so I think there's maybe a case for the profession to be reformed and saved and maybe to an extent rebranded, but it's hard to see how to do that because at least in Ontario, the kind of more evidence-based group doesn't have control of the regulatory college. And so to me, that's a clear indication that the majority of practitioners are still practicing nonsense because the regulatory college is actually made up of elected members. So, I mean, my thought on looking at that is that the chiropractic profession in this province, at least, not necessarily the case in other provinces like BC, but in this province has chosen for the regulators to be defending the old school philosophies. And so what do you do then? Do you have the health minister intervene and they try to pick out the evidence-based practitioners and put them in charge? Do you split the profession in two? Do you disband them and have them, the evidence-based practitioners, form some new profession with physical therapists? There are many ways to do it, and I don't know that any of those would be easy. So my focus so far has just been in, let's try and make the professions as they exist do their job. If we can't do that after significant activism, and I know probably some people who've been in this game a little bit longer than me think I'm maybe a bit naive because I know a lot of people have been doing this for a lot longer than I have and have not seen results. But nonetheless, I'm hoping to try and do things a little bit differently. But if we can't see significant results, after significant activism, then I think we pose the next questions. What do we do with these professions? How do we change them? And that's going to be a challenge because you need legislative authority. You need to get politicians on board. And this is a very complicated issue to actually convey to politicians. And especially during a pandemic, they seem to not care that much about this. I'll tell you that. Now, when it comes to colleges like the College of Homeopathy, I would say absolutely that college should be disbanded. You can't even make firm claims of benefits of homeopathic products. So with cases where the profession is kind of exclusively pseudoscience, I think those professions shouldn't exist. This does open us up to another secondary problem, and that is people who act as professionals, as healthcare professionals, but are unregulated. That is, they don't belong to a regulated college. So that would be homeopaths who exist in every other province. And just to give you a recent example that was popular in the media, there was a naturopath, I think it was out in BC, Zimmerman, I believe was her name, if I'm not mistaken, who went viral for offering a nonsense homeopathic treatment. The treatment involved the use of dog saliva or something. Of course, it's funny that these things go viral because all homeopathic remedies are about the same once you get them. They're diluted to the point that they're nothing. But nonetheless, she was offering crazy treatments and was just making all kinds of false claims. And I believe what ended up happening was she was a naturopath and resigned as a naturopath. Now she exists in an unregulated space. So in a way, she has removed the burden of having the oversight of regulation. And it's not exactly clear what the next steps are if people are acting as unregulated health professionals. So, people can be charged with practicing medicine without a license, but it's, from what I've seen, and I've never been involved in this, but it seems very hard to bring about those charges, and it's not clear who exactly will enforce those or investigate those. That's my very long comment on that. Good question. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we're just about out of time, but before I go on to the closing, I just wanted to again thank you, Ryan. And a couple of people have asked what they can do to help you fight the good fight. So do you have some information about how people might connect to BSW?
Yeah, send me an email. You can, or you can reach out on a contact form on our website. We're currently in the planning stages of our next project, at which point we will be happily recruiting volunteers to help us engage actually in the complaint process. So that should be very exciting. And I mean, anyone can kind of take this information and become an activist in this space on their own right too. You don't need to be with an organization or have any scientific credentials to submit a complaint to a regulatory agency. All you need to do is, if you see something problematic, find out who's responsible for it and write up a complaint and send it to the college or the regulator, Health Canada, if it's a product. And it's as easy as that. And you don't even need to be an expert in the area that you're complaining about, because the burden of actually investigating it is not on you, it's on the regulators.
Thanks, Ryan. And thanks to everyone for attending. I just have a few closing remarks before we go. First, I'd like to draw your attention to some of CFIC's upcoming events. On December 10th, which is Human Rights Day, CFIC presents our second annual panel discussion on the topic of protecting blasphemers. That starts at 6 o'clock Eastern, which is, I guess, a bit inconvenient for some people. It's sourced out of Victoria, so it's 3 o'clock for them. Then on a lighter note, on December 20th, we're going to celebrate the winter solstice with a video magic show. So please check Meetup or the CFI website or our Facebook page for more information about these or any other events. And as Kayla mentioned at the beginning, we're Canada's only national nonprofit for scientific inquiry and secular community. We hope that those of you who are not already members will consider purchasing a membership. We'll include a link to our membership in the chat window and through Meetup. I hope that you will consider joining. Your membership provides financial support to CFIC, helps us present events like this, and adds your voice to others who support science, critical thinking, and secularism. And I'd also like to thank CFI volunteers who helped out with this and many of our other events. If you'd like to volunteer with CFIC, you can sign up on our website. Many interesting positions are available for you to choose from. Again, thanks everybody for attending.